Bombay, April 1619. The British, the future leaders of a global empire, the one-day masters of a domain upon which the sun never set, the soon-to-be rulers of millions of subjects, were cowering in a tiny fortified city on the coast of India. What remained of the East India Company in the subcontinent had been under siege in Bombay for almost a year and a half. Most of the company's garrison, along with a good number of civilians, were dead from enemy attacks, starvation, or bubonic plague. And who were the architects of this British embarrassment? Another great European power, perhaps? Maybe a resurgent Mongol Empire? Nope. It was the Mughal Empire, using a collection of freelance Afro-Indian former slaves to absolutely wreck the British Empire in India. Oh yeah, we're a long way from the Raj, folks. Thanks so much to World Anvil for helping us forge today's historical tale. In the previous episode, we talked a lot about the big historical paradox that is Britain's conquest of India. The thing is, on the way to reaching that big paradox, there's actually a lot of other smaller, though no less confusing paradoxes. The first of which in this long story involves the East India Company, which began operation in 1600. Now, if you've only heard about one early modern company, the East India Company is probably it, because the EIC is a key player in a lot of important events, including the American Revolution, and as a result, it's featured in a lot of historical fiction set in this period. For instance, like a surprisingly popular film franchise based on a pirate-themed amusement park ride. Barbossa stands what? Now, in the popular retellings of East India Company history, there's a lot of focus on the company's dealings in the Caribbean and America and England, but one key area of the company's work is usually left out, which is pretty weird when you think about it because it's kind of right in the name. India. You see, the whole reason the EIC was founded to begin with was to establish trade with India, because the British wanted India's spices, silks, and textiles. But they weren't the only Europeans trying to grab Indian goods, and they most definitely were not the first. That honorific would go to the Portuguese. Their interest in India led to their famous exploration of the Cape of Good Hope at the end of the 15th century, where they reached India in 1498 to discover a sophisticated economy managed by the Mughal Empire. And as other Europeans would soon discover, this economy simply had no use for European trading goods. The best the Portuguese could manage were a small set of coastal trading stations, called factories, which were allowed to exist only with the permission of the regional Mughal leaders. Even so, by the mid-16th century, the Portuguese were the European power in the Indian Ocean, even though that power was still insignificant when compared to the Mughal Empire. And in order to extract any sort of wealth or commodities out of India, the Portuguese were forced to run up a huge trade deficit, trading the gold and silver transported from the New World in exchange for Indian goods. The situation wasn't much different for the Dutch, who began to push out the Portuguese by the end of the 1500s, improving on the Portuguese' situation through better organization. Because while the Portuguese relied on the guile and ability of individual traders to establish factories, the Dutch developed a corporation to create a more lasting and profitable foothold in the region.
Okay, hold on a minute, Buster. Why are we talking so much about the Dutch and the Portuguese? Wasn't this a story of the British East India Company?
Well, you see, Army, there's a common phrase historians have for talking about this period of history. Anything the British are famous for doing, the Dutch did first, and often better. Long before the Spanish Armada threatened England, Protestants in the Netherlands fended off wave after wave of attack from the Spanish Empire. Long before the English Civil War brought republicanism to Parliament, the Dutch Republic created a thriving state built around political and religious freedom. And long before the East India Company entered popular historical fiction, the United Dutch East India Company dominated the global trade in silks, spices, and textiles. More commonly referred to as the VOC, they combined several different East India companies into one large megacorporation, because colonialism in this era was a high-risk, high-reward venture. Individual states could sponsor new colonies or trading opportunities, but if things went wrong, which they often did, the state could be bankrupt and ripe for conquest. See Scotland in the Darien Scheme. Colonial companies, however, offered states the opportunity to get involved in the Age of Discovery without taking on that type of risk. In other words, companies like the EIC or VOC were created for the exact same reason companies are created today: to take advantage of emerging opportunities, while also focusing on the two most important words in business: limit liability. Nobles, merchants, bankers, and other investors in the early modern era could buy stocks in these types of companies in order to grab a share of lucrative international trade. And if things went wrong, they could lose a lot of money, sure, but they likely wouldn't be left penniless. The VOC, however, didn't lose much money. And by the mid-17th century, they were the richest corporation in the world, maintaining an impressive military force that included 150 merchant ships, 40 warships, and 10,000 soldiers. Oh my gosh, please nobody tell Daddy Bezos this sort of thing has a historical precedent. In addition to trading commodities, the VOC also offered their fleet and troops to local rulers in India and Indonesia to sweeten trade deals or to offer temporary support for regional wars. So, the VOC was a profit-making company, but wielded power like a state. So you know that darkest timeline dominated by transnational corporations that we fear will one day become a reality? Well, sadly, humanity has both been there and done that long ago. So, given this strength, why didn't the Dutch and the VOC dominate India? Well, because they lost interest and focused on Indonesia instead. See, from the city of Jakarta, they could monopolize the greatest prize in the early modern era, the trade in Asian spices. India was worthwhile, no doubt, but the Mughal Empire's strength posed a significant barrier to the VOC's ability to extract wealth. Whereas in Indonesia, the Dutch could dominate trade while maintaining an easier relationship with the disparate kingdoms of the archipelago. So when the East India Company finally got its act together and established their own factories along the coast of India in the mid-1600s, they weren't so much competing with the VOC as taking the Dutch's leftovers, the tough, hard-to-eat leftovers. And when the British attempted to step out of line and introduce themselves into Indonesia, the Dutch retaliated swiftly and brutally. On Ambon Island in 1623, the Dutch rounded up and tortured a small group of EIC agents who had hired Japanese Ronin to spy on VOC positions on the island. After a forced confession, the leader of the EIC agents, Gabriel Towerson, was beheaded and had his head impaled on a pole as an example to other British traders considering the same thing. So, the situation with the Dutch meant that the British were left trying to pry money out of India, which could only be done based on trade agreements dictated by the Mughal state. And when the British balked at these agreements, as they did during the Anglo-Mughal War, they were once again swiftly and brutally dealt with by the Mughal Empire, as you saw with the Siege of Bombay from the beginning of this episode. Despite the EIC's resources and a collection of warships sent by the Crown to assist in the endeavor, the British were soundly defeated in this war and were temporarily expelled from their factories along the coast. And in order to gain readmittance to India, the EIC had to admit fault for the war, pay local Indian merchants for seized goods and ships, and hand over a huge indemnity of millions of dollars in today's money to the Mughal Empire for the inconvenience. And finally, in a true show of weakness, EIC representatives were forced to prostrate themselves on the floor and beg for forgiveness at the feet of Emperor Aurangzeb during a public ceremony. Ooh boy, pretty bad, huh? Well, don't forget to add to the mixture the French, who by the end of the 17th century had established their own factories on the coast of India. That's right, yet another bully was lining up to take a crack at the faltering British.
Okay, so why is this series called The Conquest of India? Doesn't really seem like that's happening, you know?
Don't worry, Army, we'll get there. I think. Oh man, I can't believe we invented an anthropomorphic strawman armchair for this series. You know, the EC Pantheon really is a beautiful complex tapestry. Oh, which reminds me, I think it's time to update our character lore over on World Anvil. As you know by now, a lot of us here at Extra Credits have been crafting our own imaginary worlds for years, be they video games, RPGs, or novels. And I'm not gonna lie, it is a ton of work keeping all of the disparate elements of our projects organized. That is, of course, until we found World Anvil. World Anvil is an award-winning toolset used by millions of world builders, writers, and gamers that helps you create, store, and organize your world setting. You can use it to craft entire RPG campaigns, tracking timelines, family trees, and diplomatic relationships, create interactive maps to help bring your world to life. And once you're ready, you can easily share what you've built with your players, patrons, readers, or whoever. AKA precisely the toolset that saves me a ton of time and lets me focus on the fun of world building. And with over 25 stunning visual themes at your disposal, it's perfect for all genres, from sci-fi to fantasy, historical fiction, and space opera. Which I gotta be honest is super helpful for me, because remember that Riff's Gungeon 17th century rom-com mashup campaign I mentioned last time? Yeah, they just got access to a Stargate, so I'm gonna need all the assets I can get. So if you want to up your world-building game and have a really good time doing it, you can check out World Anvil absolutely free, or for a limited time, you can receive 40% off any annual membership by using the code EXTRACREDITS. Then, not only will the awesome worlds you dream up come to life faster, but you'll also be helping out us in the process. Once again, that's code EXTRACREDITS for 40% off any annual membership. Thanks so much for your support, and we can't wait to see what you build. That's right, Zoe. Ahmed Ziad Turk, Alicia Bramble, Casey Mustia, Dominic Valenciana, Joseph Blame, Kyle Murgatroyd, and O'Reels1 are fantastic legendary patrons.